The following is a fan-based discussion, and all materials being discussed are owned by Toei and Subaraya Productions. I claim no ownership to the materials being discussed and is purely fan opinion. Hello everyone and welcome to another video on the Toku FanimeX channel. And for this video, I am continuing with my list of top tokusatsu shows. This time I am back with Kamen Rider. For those of you who don't know what Kamen Rider is, it is basically superpowered individuals who usually have insect motifs, and they fight against the supervillains in their respective shows, who are commonly known as kaijins. And as usual, just like with my Super Sentai list, let's start off with some honorable mentions. However, unlike my Super Sentai list, which I did a top 10 for Kamen Rider, I'm only doing a top 5 because the simple reason is I've not seen as many Kamen Rider as I have with Super Sentai. Kamen Rider, I have not finished all of the Heisei eras. And as such, I can't really make a top 10 without putting all of the shows that I have watched up to this point in my list, which is something I don't want to do. So I just decided to just do a top 5 for Kamen Rider instead of a top 10.
So without further ado, let's get right into this.
If you're a Kamen Rider fan or just even seen a few Kamen Rider seasons out there, you would know that a Kamen Rider's main mode of transportation is a motorcycle. But what if instead we had a Kamen Rider show where the main rider's main mode of transportation is something else, specifically a car? That's right, to get into this show, you need to
Start your engine!
Yep, my first honorable mention is Kamen Rider Drive. Now, Drive is a good show, at least in my opinion, it is a good show. But the reason why this show is not in my main top 5 list is because this show does not start off good. They get better in the second half, like the characters, the story, even the villains. The villains were not great, but they're not awful. I like the side casts to an extent, but this show does not start off the best. I won't say it has a horrible start, but it does not have a great start, which is why it's not in my main list, but it's still not a bad show whatsoever. Space is one of the worlds of mystery that we humans are trying to understand more about. And this serves as a constant reminder of just how little we are compared to the entire universe. But on the other hand, what is something that we all know about, and it is a great thing for us to have? The answer to that is friendship, or at least that's one of the many answers to this question. So, what if we had a Kamen Rider show that features both space and friendship in its theme and motif? That's right, ladies and gentlemen, I present to you my second honorable mention in
仮面ライダーポーズ
That's right, Kamen Rider Force A. Now, when I initially made this list, I was debating very hard whether or not to actually put Kamen Rider Force A into my main top 5 list because I really did enjoy the show when I first watched it. But the more I thought about it, the more I would not consider Force A to be in my top 5s because this show, the villains are relatively weak. And some of the gimmicks, specifically when it came to the source for Forza's power, didn't really make sense in a few cases. But the heroes are all good, minus really one of them, to be fair. And the dynamic between our main writer and secondary writer in this show, peak. One of the best character dynamics out there. This duo is honestly one of the best Kamen Rider duos out there. But Forza is still a good show. Like this this friendship theme really did make it stand out. It's just, I would not say the show is quite good enough to be in my top 5.
All Kamen Rider shows, with the concepts and themes that they're working with, they all have infinite potential to be good. But what if we had a Kamen Rider show where the concept of infinity is in its name with an additional component? And we also have a Kamen Rider protagonist who is extremely optimistic, at least compared to other Kamen Rider protagonists out there. If you're gonna come into this show, prepare to Kamen Rider O's. Now, O's is an amazing show. I think it's amazing. I really wanted to put this show into my top 5. I really wanted to. But compared to what I already have in my top 5, the top 5 I have just overshadowed O's. Like, O's is not a bad show. I love the protagonist, Eiji, and his relationship with Ankh. And the side characters are all good. The second writer's great. The plot is great. The suits look fantastic. There's just not a lot of bad things. There's not many bad things to say at all about O's. The reason why it's not in my top 5 is simply because of the fact that my top 5, I like them more than O's, but O's is still an amazing show. That's all of my honorable mentions. Now let's get into the main list, starting off with number 5.
I don't know about you guys, but I love detective shows. This is why Detective Conan is one of my favorite animes of all time. And in this show, for those criminal kaijins out there, let's just say the Futari de Hitori no Tantei-sa has this to say to you.
さあお前の罪を数えろ
Kamen Rider W or Double. This show was an amazing start to the Neo Heisei phase of Kamen Rider. This show had great characters, both heroes and villains alike. Although on the hero side, there's -1 to that, though I didn't mind her that much. This show is also the first to feature 2 protagonists, as like I said before, it's the 2-in-1 detective. Their dynamic and chemistry is great, which is why the show works and why I like it so much. This show had a very good plot with very good villains. The characters were all great, -1 to an extent. But this show is just great. Now, here's the reason why this show is in my top 5 and O's and 4's are not. Because W has the same structure as O's and 4's in that it's mostly made out of 2-parters, where it's a resolution part as the second part, and the first part is basically the initial part. I feel like the 2-parter structure works the best with W because W is a detective themed show. So the first part is them basically investigating, and then the second part will be the resolution arc, which I feel like works the best with W than it does with O's and 4's A. Like, I like all 3 of these shows, but I feel like because of the way the structure works the best with W, W is my favorite out of these 3.
What is one thing that we all need to consume every day to maintain our health? That's right, it's fruits. So an odd question that I'll ask here is, how well would fruits work as armor for Kamen Riders, or in this case, warriors? You would be surprised at how well fruit can work as armor pieces. And if you're gonna watch this show, I suggest that you Kamen Rider Gaim. This show is a very fun ride when I first watched it. The characters were great. I love the development these characters got with Gaim, Baron, Senketsu, and Ryugen. The villains were not the best, which is why this show is not that high on the list. But this show is still fantastic. Like, there are a few problems I have with the writing in some cases, but overall, this show is amazing. If you haven't checked out Gaim, you got to check it out. It's one of the better Neo Heisei Kamen Rider shows out there. All Kamen Rider fans know that Kamen Riders are commonly seen as the force of good, as they fight to protect the people who can't protect themselves. And how do they do that? By fighting the kaijins and monsters. But what if I told you that not all Kamen Riders are on the force of good? In fact, it is in this show that first establishes in the Heisei area that a Kamen Rider may not be good. In fact, there are Kamen Riders that are evil in this show. And the big reason for that is because in this universe, if you are a Kamen Rider, your purpose can really be summed up with just one word, which is also the most commonly said word in this show, and that word is.
And don't even think about not complying because Kamen Rider Ryuki. Now, this is the first Kamen Rider show I've seen from start to finish. And even on the first watch, I loved this show so much. I loved the whole idea of a Kamen Rider battle royale where the Kamen Riders fight each other. And even though there's still kaijins with the mirror monsters, a rider's main enemy is a rider. I love the characters, well, most of them, because there were a few I hated, but they didn't really matter that much. I love majority of the suit designs in this. I loved the dynamic between the main rider and the second rider with Ryuki and Knight. I felt that dynamic was very done well, and that rivalry was very done very well. I like the plot as well because it really gave me a sense of really desperation in a lot of cases, which I love a lot about it. It also this sort of has the same thing as Drive, where it doesn't start off the best. I won't say it doesn't start off great because it still has a good start in my opinion. But when the show really picks up is when Kamen Rider Oja shows up, where the stakes get raised. From that point on, this show goes hard, and I love it because of that. Ryuki's my first Kamen Rider show I've watched as a whole, and it's up there as one of my favorites. But of course, there's still two more above this one, so let's find out what those two are first. Now, even though Ryuki was the first Kamen Rider show I've watched from start to finish, this show was not the show that brought me into Kamen Rider. Because I remember as a kid, I used to constantly watch fight scenes of a particular Kamen Rider fighting the monsters in his own show. And when I actually watched the show, I loved it so much. This show was featured a protagonist that is extremely optimistic and is willing to fight for the smiles of the people around him. And with this protagonist around, even though the villains in the show are extremely menacing and terrifying in both their looks and the way they do things, but with him around, you can always guarantee that you will experience. And that Kamen Kuga. It's one of the best Kamen shows out there, period. And I'm not just saying that because it's my top second favorite, but it is genuinely a very good show. Just like Double, it was an amazing start to the Heisei era as a whole, and even to the whole Kamen Rider franchise as a whole, because before Kuga, Kamen Rider was on a very long hiatus before Kuga came in and revived the entire franchise as a whole. Now, Kuga is beautiful. Now, the plot is slow because this show is more like a cop drama rather than a commerce show, because it focuses more on the characters, where the character drives the plot, and it it shows the police actually participating in taking down the villains, which is something I enjoy watching. And of course, we have our main protagonist, Yusuke Godai, who is one of the best comedy protagonists out there. He's an amazing man. Whenever you see him with a thumbs up, you know that everything's okay whenever he's around, and I love that about him. We also have Detective Ichijo, the secondary writer in the show without a suit, basically. This show is great. What else is there to say about it? A great start to the franchise, a great show in general, great characters, great villains. These villains are actually menacing, which is something I love about this show. Show's villains. Great plot, as it's character driven. What else to really say about this? This show is great. It's awesome. It's fantastic. Now, on to my favorite Kamen Rider series of all time, and probably will be for the rest of my life, even after I finish Kamen Rider as a whole. What are two things that you can think of that are important to the point that they're basically needs in our life? One is doctors, because we get injured, we get sick, it's inevitable. And as such, we need doctors that help treat us and also give us advice on how to not get sick the second time. But another thing that I can also think of that we also need in our life is video games. Technically, this is a want, not a need, but let's face it, for a lot of us, it's basically a need. So, what if we had a Kamen Rider show that incorporates both a doctor and games in its show's motif and theme? Or more specifically, a gaming doctor. Let
And I hope for your sake that you don't get a.
Kamen Rider Exado. From the moment I watched this show, I basically knew that this show was gonna be my favorite Kamen Rider series of all time. And it probably will be even after I finish the rest of the Kamen Rider franchise, at least for now. But this show is incredible. The video game motif, the power levels, which is something that I love about it, because this show doesn't suffer from inconsistent power levels like a lot of other commerce seasons out there do. But every character is great. The amount of growth and development these characters undergo with our main writer, our second writer, our tertiary writer, even our extra writers all go through growth and development, and I love that about it. This show has an extremely serialized story, which is awesome. The seeing these characters going from not liking each other to basically willing to work together and basically accepting each other, very fun to watch. This show, what else is there to say about this show? This show was so good. Now, there are some things I didn't like about the show. One thing being the aesthetics in a few cases. Like, I liked most of the suits in Exade, but there were a few like that I didn't like the look of. But besides that, this show is peak, at least in my opinion. It is incredible. Now, from all these Kamen Rider shows I've mentioned in this video, what is something that you think these shows all have in common? That's right, they are all in the Heisei era, which makes sense given the fact that I've only watched Kamen Rider shows from the Heisei era. I've not watched any of the Showa or Reiwa Kamen Rider series. And I gotta say, most of the Heisei era Kamen Rider shows I've watched up to this point are good shows, or at least reasonable shows. But like everything there is in the world, something good has to start somewhere. That's right. My next review, aka my first Kamen Rider review, is gonna be on Kamen Rider Kuga. Stay tuned for my Kamen Rider Kuga review. Feel free to comment in the comment section below on what your top picks for Kamen Rider is. And as usual, don't forget to like and subscribe. Bye everybody.